All right, let's talk about the endocrine system and what it is and what it does. So, we're actually going to be talking about the endocrine system this whole semester, but we're going to sort of do a quick intro. And every time we go over a new system this whole semester, we'll talk about the hormones that are responsible for that system. And there's thousands of hormones. We only think about the specific ones when we're thinking about sex, I guess. Those are the two popular ones. But we're going to find out quickly that there's tons of hormones. We're going to find out what they do. So endocrine system, endo, which means within, and crine means secrete. So it's a system that interacts with the rest of the body using the blood as its way of kind of communicating. It'll make a hormone, travel through the blood system, and go to these different organs to do some sort of reaction. And in this little picture, you could see a couple of the hormone organs that it'll interact with. It can do the thyroid, the parathyroids, which are behind it. We'll talk about them in exam 2. The thymus, we'll also talk about that in exam 2, I believe. The adrenal glands and the kidneys, we'll talk about them in exam 3. The pancreas, we'll talk about that in exam 4. Ovaries and testes, and we'll talk about that for the final. But what happens is it'll make special hormones that'll go to these areas to communicate and tell them what to do. And really what they're trying to do is keep your body in stasis, homeostasis. So what are these systems? They're made up of glands that produce and secrete hormones, which are like chemical messengers. They regulate growth, metabolism, sexual development, response to injuries, you name it, it does it. It really gets a small rap, but we're going to cover a ton of stuff that it does. Really, it's designed for internal balance of the body system, and we know that's called homeostasis. Stasis means level, homeo means the same. So it's going to try to keep us in this normal balance. We're going to be talking about pHs of the body, oxygen levels, CO2 levels, all these different things that would try to keep balance. Temperature, we of course know, but we're going to cover other things too this semester that we have to keep in homeostasis. And this is kind of what we're looking at. You could see that the body wants to keep it at this normal stasis, and what we're going to have to do is keep it in this similar sort of area. So if something happens to lower something, we're going to go ahead and increase the internal environment or do something to correct for that and try to get it back to optimal. So we're going to keep doing this to try to keep us close to baseline. So this could be, let's say, pH, where our pH goes too low. Our body will do something like make us breathe, maybe even excrete some stuff to get our pH back up. Maybe it goes too high, so it'll sort of come back to normal and eventually try to get us as close to this midline as possible. So the big idea is that hormones are chemicals or messages that act on target cells, and they're going to travel through the bloodstream going to these specific cells. And these cells have these specific receptors for those hormones. So this hormone could travel around, let's say it is destined for your adrenal glands. It'll pass all the other different tissues and miss those, but when it gets to the adrenal glands, those receptors are going to touch that hormone and activate something. And there's two types of activations or responses that our body does. We talked about the endocrine, which means secretion inside the body. And the other one is going to be called exocrine. And exocrine secretes outside the body. So this could be outside even the organ too. So endo usually inside reaction, exo means outside, and crine means some sort of response. So I wrote sweat there for temperature, but it really could be anything that's happening in or outside the cell. So a pancreas can do an endocrine and an exocrine reaction because it'll act on the pancreas, and the pancreas will do some sort of response outside of itself. So exocrine. There's different types of communication that we have to get to know with cells. We're 100 trillion cells, and they all have to communicate and talk to one another. And we're going to do it through these special pathways. And we're going to do it through gap junctions, local paracrine hormones, and endocrine hormones. A gap junction, so imagine that this is a cell on this side, and this is a cell on this side. So there's two big cells, but we're only seeing a little cutaway. You're seeing that there's this special protein, and it's allowing certain things to go from one side to the other side. So these like-minded cells are attached, and they're kind of like pores. So they're going to allow the liquid environment from this cell to sort of go into the liquid environment of this cell and just keep flowing back and forth. And that's a great way to get hormones and chemicals from one cell to another. And that's going to be called gap junctions. So they're pores made of proteins in the cell membrane, and they allow certain things to travel through. Pancreans, which are going to be paracrines, they're going to be secreted into tissues. And an example could be that neurotransmitter that we talked about, where we had our axon, it basically had some energy, calcium got in, and then all of a sudden we had those neurotransmitters released to the other side to do something. That's going to be a paracrine reaction, where we're going to secrete something outside in the body to do a secondary response. So here's a cell, it secretes this little hormone to go to this cell to do a secondary response. And then, of course, we have our hormonal ones, which are going to be long-distance messages. These could be lasting for a while, and these messages could last for, when we did nerve endings, it was a quick message that had to be close to that cell, where this one could be a long distance. What we're seeing in the middle is going to be the pituitary glands. And you can see that there's two parts of the pituitary gland, which we'll talk about soon, and they make different hormones that travel to different parts of the body, different organs. And we'll talk about those soon. But what happens near the pituitary gland is there's a ton of blood vessels here. And anytime this makes a hormone, it goes into those capillaries or blood vessels and travels to these organs to tell it to do something. So the similarities between the endocrine system and the nervous system are that some chemicals can be both neurotransmitters and hormones. If you remember back from 201, the norepinephrines, the epinephrines, and dopamines, they could be either or hormones or neurotransmitters. Some hormones are secreted by the neurons, so they're going to be neuroendocrine cells. So ones that we're going to talk about soon, there's going to be oxytocin, an anti-diuretic hormone that's going to control water balance in your body. Some effects could be similar to either system. They both, like for instance, norepinephrine and glucagon are going to break down in the liver, and they're also going to regulate different things in the body. Some differences is that, let's do nervous system first because you're familiar with that one. It's a super quick response. It's 1/10 of a millisecond. It stops quickly, and the effects of the targets are specific organs or tissues. Where with the endocrine system, it reacts slow, could take days, could take just a small amount of time, but it takes a while. It's got to go from that pituitary gland to those organs. It affects many, could be seconds, days, or weeks, and it's generally widespread. So it could go to one cell, or it could go to organs. So that's what we're hoping. And let's do the next video, how hormones work.